Well, good evening and welcome to the University of Tasmania's Island of Ideas public talk series. I'm Dr. Jack Charlesworth. I'm the Director of Data and Digital Research here at the University of Tasmania, and it is my great pleasure to be here with you all, including people online and in this room, to host tonight's talk, The Promise and Perils of Artificial Intelligence. But first, I would like to acknowledge that we're here on Lutruwita, Tasmania, the unceded lands of the Palawa people, the enduring custodians of these lands, seas, and waterways. Here in Nipaluna, Hobart, beneath Kunyani, we reflect deeply upon technological transformations, particularly artificial intelligence, and the profound impact they may have on how knowledge and identity are formed, shared, and valued. We acknowledge that the Palawa, and indeed all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, possessed the longest continuous knowledge system on this planet, living, evolving frameworks of wisdom maintained for tens of thousands of years. Yet, in the emerging landscapes of AI, Indigenous voices, perspectives, and knowledge are frequently absent, overlooked, or misunderstood, reinforcing a long-standing legacy of exclusion and invisibility. As we explore both the promise and perils of AI, let us remain conscious that technology inherently reflects the values, biases, and historical contexts of its creators. AI doesn't just perpetuate bias, it amplifies it. Let us be conscious of what is missing from the outputs of AI. Whose stories are told, whose data informs the development of AI, and whose knowledge is validated remain critical questions we should keep exploring through the discussions tonight and onwards. We pay deep respect to Palawa elders past and present, to those who never had the opportunity to reach elder status, and to the Muanina people of Nipaluna who did not survive colonisation, but whose vision of caring for country we continue to honour and respect. We warmly acknowledge any Aboriginal community members present with us today. May our shared exploration tonight foster greater inclusion, respect, and understanding. The Island of Ideas series reflects the university's commitment to fostering critical conversations that inspire action and create meaningful change for Tasmania and beyond, and tonight's discussion is no different. Artificial intelligence is no longer a thing of the future. It is shaping our present. From generative tools that can write, draw, and mimic human speech, to wearable devices that can possibly read our minds, AI is transforming the way we live, work, and even understand ourselves. But with this transformation comes a critical question. How do we harness the promise of AI while guarding against its most dangerous assumptions? Tonight, three speakers will explore the concepts of the promise and perils of AI based on their own diverse expertise. First, we'll hear from Mars Buttfield-Addison. Mars developed specialised software used in astronomy, space weather modelling, and the tracking of asteroids and space debris. Before turning her focus to space, she worked in traditional computing, software development, machine learning, and high-performance systems. She is also a video game developer, science communicator, and educational content creator. And on top of that, Mars is currently undertaking a PhD at the University of Tasmania and has been recognised as one of science and technology's Australian superstars of STEM. Please join me in welcoming Mars.
We've got a lot to get through, so forgive me if I start a bit fast. I've been told to point up here. So I figured we've got a diverse lineup of different expertise to present to you today, but given the title AI, some of you are probably coming here expecting to speak about a very, very specific kind of AI. So I thought I'd pull more on the kind of experiences I've had working in the creative industries, as we've said, the kinds of things I do on the side, to give a bit of an explainer and some of the things that we're seeing in industry, not necessarily academic. And I've titled this segment, AI is a meaningless term. And that is because AI has been applied to so many different technologies that I can say as equally true, AI is old, AI is new, AI has changed our world, will change our world, and we should stop using it completely today. AI is simple and complex because AI has been a term we've been using for 70 years. And it is actually the case that the person who first used the term AI to talk about a technology which already existed then passed away about 15 years ago. So AI has been lots of things. First, AI was any ability for a system to infer new facts. So if you say things like Bob is a male, Jane is a female, Billy is a male, Bob is a sibling to Jane, etc., laws that we have decided about language and their relationship to people and their relations, as simplified as they are, now all of a sudden, a system could say, Bob is the uncle of Billy, and Billy is the nephew of Bob, even though we did not tell the computer that exact fact. That was artificial intelligence. Look at it go. Then artificial intelligence was a computer's ability to decide things based on rules that we had given it. It could make these compound facts together form a tree of behaviors that we should follow. And if you're thinking that this looks like those weird old magazine quizzes, you would be right. Modern AI is little more than that on a greater scale, even though the things that the nodes represent and the ways that they operate are different. So let's call this a neural network, because it looks a little bit like neurons attached in our brains. And let's say that this is what AI is now. AI today is used in kind of generally 3 different ways, each of which builds on the previous. We can recognize patterns, we can make decisions, and we can make new content. And some of those are great, and some of those are bad. Pattern recognition is our ability to say, observe that when it is hot and it is humid, it tends to storm. Now, that alone doesn't require an AI, but when you have some set of historical data which makes all these observations and it grows too large for a human to look at and see those patterns, you can apply an AI method or mathematical model to try and find those correlations, to say when X happens, Y tends to happen too, or quite often when X, Y, Z all the way through the alphabet, this thing happens most often. That's great. That gives us new data points. This is just another form of statistical analysis, much like looking at averages and ranges, and it teaches us things about the world which we might not otherwise see. But it's left up to a human's interpretation of what to do with that information, and that's important. Decision-making is the kind of AI which goes and classifies things. Now, that's good when it does something like supports a decision made by a human being. Say, hey, when we're doing town planning, it's pretty good if we put water fountains this often, or hey, it's pretty good if you as a doctor looking at lots of medical scans all day get told, maybe you want to look at this bit here because I see something that might catch your attention, might fit your criteria for looking at. It's not so good when it gets to make decisions on its own. And that's where we hear all of those horror stories about bias. We hear those AI models which deny parole to certain kinds of people that they decide are better at, or more commonly going to be recidivists, or denying certain kinds of people insurance, or the horrible one that's everywhere, even in Tasmania, hiring AI, where it's screening all of the applicants to your company. I remember being at a conference in Berlin many years ago already, when then Amazon had adopted a hiring AI model, and one of their workers decided to go rogue and test this model to kind of see what kinds of people it was picking up. And the things that made you most likely to get a job through that AI model was if your name was Jared and you played lacrosse in high school. So maybe decision-making, probably not for anything that's a really big kind of stakes argument, but decision support is great. Or if you're using it for flagging something into a smaller pipeline that a human can digest. Later, we'll hear about some really, really important kinds of flagging of content, and things like anomaly detection, which say this particular user is doing something weird, of course, power some of our most important fraud detection and systems like that are critical to our operating safely online. But then we get to content generation, which is ChatGPT. This is probably what you came here to fight me about. And I'm going to say that you probably use it in one of 3 different ways. There's the get you information, kind of summarize things that are out there already. There's the make things for you, like images or emails or essays. And there's the have a conversation with you, which is why people are having conversations with ChatGPT, where it argues that it is sentient. But so would a parrot if you taught it to. I would argue that this is not great in its current iteration. And I'm going to tell you why. Not because the technology is bad, not because any of the approaches behind it are bad, but because the way we are using it is not to its strengths and not to our benefits. I would argue the current iterations of these models are owned by a select few. They're trained on stolen content. They do all these horrible things to the environment that we know from other things people won't care about. But they currently devalue other people in your markets and you yourself. If you use it, you are devaluing your own job. You will put yourself out of work. Not necessarily to remove your roles entirely. Now, if you ever get up in a public forum and you have these kinds of views, people will say that you're just scared of the future. You're a Luddite because they don't really understand what that means. They'll say that you're being exclusionary and anti-accessibility because tools that enhance your productivity and ability to create are, of course, allowing new people who wouldn't otherwise be able to make things or be involved in things be a part of that discussion. And I think that's great. But we also have this weirdly polluted argument where people say, if you don't like it in its current iteration in its entirety, that means you're scared of the future. And if you say that you do like it, that means that you're kind of happy with every way that it's currently being used. And I think that it's incredibly divisive for there to only be these two camps. I would argue this is not me having a lack of understanding, and it's not me being scared just for my own job and no one else's. I would say this is a labor issue. And so I will give you a tale of two vehicle anomalies. That's not the right word, metaphors. A forklift. You can go to a gym and you can lift weights. If you bring a forklift to the gym, you can lift more weights, but that is not the point. The doing is the point. And that is what we see when we have students who are using AI models to write their essays in university. We can tell them not to and tell them not to and tell them not to, but they will, because those motivations are there, those constraints and pressures in their lives. We're not accounting for those contexts. Whether we tell them not to or not, they will. And then they will not get the benefit of lifting those weights themselves. And the other thing is a mobility scooter. A mobility scooter is incredibly important for the people who need to make use of it. There are people who need it all the time, need it some of the time, and for so many people, it can make their lives completely different in wonderful ways. But if everyone in the world got on a mobility scooter right now and tried to take to the footpaths, they would become unusable for everybody. You can't have these measures, which were meant for a few people, all of a sudden adopted by everyone without changes to the fundamental infrastructure which supports that. Those other systems around it need to change. And so this is what we see things like the SAG-AFTRA strike, where everyone's like, oh, those writers, they're out there striking again. But they were out there because these studios were attempting to adopt AI and not necessarily push them out. This is what everyone says, is AI going to take my job? No, it's just going to compete with you for your job so that you have to be more productive for the same amount of money and under constant pressures because they will say they could replace you. In the SAG-AFTRA strikes, writers were complaining because they came out to studios that were trying to adopt AI, where a writer would get one certain set of fees for writing an original script and a much smaller set of fees for editing a script which already existed. Now a studio could just get an AI to write a script in 30 seconds and then hand it to a writer who would now have to change everything about it. But now they were in an editor role. Now they were a script doctor, not a script writer. And this is a fundamental misunderstanding of the creative process and of the roles and the expertise involved in that, because it's not about whether you wrote the original words versus edited some words that were already on the page. It's about whether your intent, your creativity, your expertise, all of your time in that industry are being encapsulated, or you're working on someone else's vision. That's what those two roles and two fees were meant to represent. And they are being misused, weaponized against the people who were made to use these tools. Sorry. And we have a bunch of protections. Of course, the internet has been bad to us before. Many years ago, they already forced us out of all of our personal privacy and personal information in return for services which we now fundamentally need and cannot opt out of while still operating functionally in society. The web made a bunch of protections. We made ways for you to license content as protected or copyright music you put on Spotify. You can make your code private in repositories that cannot be read, and you can make your websites have files. Almost every website you go to will have this file that says who can and cannot read it, that usually says that humans can, and certain kinds of scrapers who are just going to scrape, save, download, and monetize their content cannot. AI models are currently ignoring all of these things. And the people who operate these large models say that if they did adhere to all of these well-established rules we have used since the dawn of the World Wide Web, then they wouldn't be able to do what they're doing. If you operate a business that says, well, we couldn't do it if we stopped stealing, then what you operate is organized crime. And so I would say this current iteration of AI is doing us no good, because as we have this public web that is being scraped and downloaded into these models that are then being trained on that information, as we go forward, more and more of the internet is produced by AI. And so they're kind of eating their own output and being diluted and diluted from their original sources of truth. We're seeing in more and more productivity studies that while people, almost every user, like 65 to 90% of users, think that they are being more productive with AI, once you control for all the new tasks in your day that are introduced by having to edit and having to search and using it in a non-optimal way, you actually only gain about 2 to 3% productivity. You end up using that extra time on work anyway. Even if you don't use AI, you also get those disbenefits of extra tasks from your workmates. And overall, you get paid the same, and your bosses still think that you're delivering stuff late and not often enough. We see the quality of work is dropping because by law, by the rule of mathematics, you are producing something that is mediocre. And we know that in the current labor constraints of people who are overworked and competing with each other, no matter how many times you tell them that they need to be checking the output of these models, they can't do it as well as you expect them to. And no matter how many times you tell them not to, then they'll just lie about it. People in important roles are saying, that's okay if I use it this way, just submit this one document that's made straight from ChatGPT without checking, because people who are in important jobs won't be doing this. But we know from asking people in what we would argue are important jobs, they also think that they're doing it bad, but everyone else will be doing it good, so it's okay. We also know that all of the public conversation about these kinds of technologies are coming from the companies who either make those technologies, make the hardware those technologies are being trained on and rely on, or make something that relies on their dissatisfaction or inefficiency or ineffectualness. So we have companies like NVIDIA who make GPUs, the kind of hardware that train AI models, out there being put on major platforms saying that school teachers are no more, everyone needs an AI tutor. And on the other end, we have companies like LinkedIn saying that they're eating all entry-level jobs because now we just have ChatGPT. And so my biggest concern is that there is not enough research going into this by impartial parties. And the couple of studies that are out there from like the US National Institute of Economics or the University of Chicago that look at longitudinal studies across different jobs are seeing that it's making people worse. It's having negative social effects. It's making people feel more overworked, feel less expert, less respected, less rewarded, and less compensated over time. We know all of the ways to stop that, but we're just not doing it because the people who control that conversation and control these models aren't incentivized to. And in most cases, we hear, especially at the university, the doing is the point. So there's also that complete distinction between people who are making something for the sake of the output versus making something for the doing. And I would say specifically here at the University of Tasmania, we know from decades that Tasmania is kind of small, and we try to compete with people at scale, other universities, other states, other populations. We can't compete at scale, but we can compete at quality. We can compete at culture. And when we adopt technologies like this blindly, what we're doing is we're trying to sacrifice our unique fingerprint of work, our unique expertise and quality of work for something that will let us do more work. And we already know well before AI that that doesn't work for economies like ours. And so a few months ago, I was in this very room for an amateur radio conference. I assure you that community is still going strong, and it's a great fun if you have time for it, where a friend of mine, Martin, put it best when he said, "I've got little interest in having my computer talk to your computer. That's not the point." Thank you.
Thank you, Mars, for a very refreshing take on the discussion and an excellent start to getting us thinking about what we're talking about here when we're engaging with AI. Our next speaker is Associate Professor Frederic Gilbert. Frederic is a philosopher and the principal lead at the Ethics Lab, University of Tasmania. His research focuses on the ethics of novel implantable brain-computer interfaces operated by AI. Implantable technologies that raise profound questions about autonomy, agency, and the boundaries of self. His work sits at the cutting edge of AI ethics, where machines don't just respond to us, they integrate with us. Welcome to the floor, Fred.
All right, can everybody hear me well? Okay. Yes, it's a French accent. It's not the microphone having a dysfunction. Thank you very much, Jack, for this very generous introduction, and thank you, CSIRO, for the opportunity to discuss. So I would like to take the time with you to look at one question. I don't have much time, but let's focus on one element, which is the following. There is an increasing body of evidence showing that there are technologies which represent the combination of artificially intelligent system and neurotechnologies that can read the mind. So my modest question I would like to explore with you is whether or not we need new human rights or new law to protect ourselves against those technologies, which are invasive, intrusive, but as well invisible. Okay, you have likely seen in mass media or specialized magazine, even in the most influential scientific journal, such as Nature, the rhetoric according to which mind-reading devices are revealing brain secrets, the mind-reading machines are coming, how can we keep them at checks? Mind-reading machines are here, it's time to worry, et cetera, et cetera. So you have this rhetoric, that narrative that it's coming toward it. Even I think the way that it was advertised, the event did use that expression, but it's likely the right way to use it. The point being that the brain is the final frontier of our privacy, and AI is about to breach it. That's the idea. And do we need to protect ourselves against that? Where to start? Briefly, it's with the notion of freedom of thought. I was very, very briefly introduced that. What is freedom of thought? Let's look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, written in 1948, and more specifically, Article 18, which stipulated for a segment that everyone has the right of freedom of thought. So what is freedom of thought? I presume that most of you are paying attention to what I'm talking now, but perhaps there's 73% of you that pretend to listen to me. Hey, more power to you. Okay, that is freedom of thought. I don't have any ability, capacity to extract that truthness. What you're thinking, what you're fantasizing about, what you're believing, it's not under my authority. As such, we need to protect potentially those elements. So what is freedom of thought? Is this sacrosanct, secretive, hidden, what was called in the past the forum internum, the internal forum. That's something that you need to confess. This, you own it. This is an absolute right. It cannot be restricted compared to the freedom of expression or freedom of assembly, because we presume that privacy is an ontological element that determines who we are as a person, okay? In that respect, all matter that concern the freedom of thoughts are important, and Human Rights Commission specify that no one can compel you to reveal your thoughts, all right? So if you do not consent, you should not divulgate, you should not disclose what is secret for you, okay? But remember, that document was written in 1948. Technologies have changed since. And there's a lot of scholars that would like to implement what we call neuro rights, new protections against machines that can read or thoughts or decode brain activity. All right, I'll be quickly talking about a few technologies to give you an idea that I'm not fabulating, but you will see the promises. But while I will be talking about those technology, you will see that, wow, this is quite spectacular. This is amazing. But at the same time, you're probably going to start to be a bit afraid or a bit scared about those technologies. Okay, this is Anne. She had a stroke about 20 years ago, from which she's suffering from aphasia, unable to talk. And about 3 years ago, she underwent, was recruited in an experimental trial testing a brain-computer interface that is capable of decrypting her brain activity and convert that into sentence. You might have seen Stephen Hopkins in the past using his eyes to pick up words or letters on the screen. If you were asking him a question, it could take about up to 10 minutes to answer, but not for Anne. She simply need to think about the answer and the computer just formulate the response for her. And what is remarkable is that she can speak up to 78 words per minute. On average, human being will talk about 100 words per minute, except if they are French and living in Paris. That would be about 400 words per minute, but that's another problem. Yeah, no, it's quite remarkable. Think about it. So we're getting closer to an ongoing live conversation by strictly thinking about sentences, you don't pronounce them. The computer is capable of extracting them and converting them. And even that paper showed that it's up to 83 words per minute. So those systems are getting more faster and more accurate. Now, this cutting edge, perhaps some of you have heard about it, groundbreaking study by Tang. Participants spent about 16 hours in a fMRI machine. So the machine is basically looking at the oxygen consumption, because when you talk, there's blood in the blood, there's hydrogen, oxygen, and the machine is capable of detecting the distribution, from which 16 hours of training combining with GTP, the grandfather of the famous chat GTP, from with predicting sentence semantic. After what those participants were asked simply and strictly to think about sentences, and the system had to guess by looking at the oxygen consumption. And this is quite remarkable and spectacular, because what is groundbreaking is that we have stepped into the gist. What is the gist? I don't have time to go all through this, but look at the last example. So participant is asked to think about something, doesn't tell anyone. I don't have my driving license yet. Computer decipher, she is not ready. She has not even started to learn to drive yet. So there's words that are exact, accurate, but the gist is there. We know what is going on there, but it's not yet accurate. Other example, and I just jumped out right when I needed to, computer, and I had to push her out of the car. So obviously, if you're at the tribunal, if you use that as evidence, you might have some criminal consequences here. So we're not there yet, but the point is that we're stepping toward an element where semantic is going toward the right direction, okay? And that paper was published 2 years ago, taking 16 hours. They published a piece 2 months ago, and it takes only 70 minutes, just over an hour now to train the machine. And last part, participants were asked to look at clips and to imagine the dialogue, to imagine the description, and the computer was capable of reading that by strictly looking at the oxygen, nothing else. Again, you don't need to be implanted. It's strictly through a machine that reads brain activity. Okay, I think you get a sense that where we're going. Okay, why should you be concerned? All right, those machines are in the lab, but there are already some around us. That's an example in China on people to test their ability to focus. There's a light here. If it's green, that means the student is focusing. If it's red, that means they're not paying attention. As such, they can survey and monitor brain activity. Here, there's a very great Australian invention, Epiminder. The system is constantly reading brain activity and predict epileptic seizure, and the patient can receive notification, there's a headband. And this one is interesting. Apple investing in an AirPod capable of reading brain activity. So if you're jogging, for instance, and want to hear a song about Taylor Swift, well, there you go. You just need to think about it. So why do you need to be concerned about that? It's strictly that that market is going bigger. And we know that we all have phone now. And 20 years ago, not many people here had phone, right? The fact that they're tinier, they can be on glasses, earphone, things are advancing. And why should we be concerned is that you cannot pinpoint exactly the data that you need to extract. That's basically the cornerstone of the issue, the legal issue here. If you want to predict epilepsy, the device does not target epileptic data. It has to extract everything. And what is into that everything? Something that you don't want to confess, something that you want to keep secret, right? All those elements are putting on the cloud and have the ability potentially to be deciphered and decrypted. But that's the legal problem, the roots of why we might need further protection. There's a lot of scholars doing great work. Raphael Hughes is a prominent and it has a big impact. For instance, it has instigated some modification of the Chilean constitution. There's a big movement in South America. Brazil is on top of it. Even the United States have promoted some bill. But the idea is that we need to protect ourselves against the fact that if you can transcript neural activity, we might be able to transcript the mind. It's always that rhetoric. Narrow technologies allow access via mind-reading device to citizen-specific thought. Company, government developing devices that would allow people to communicate by thinking, deciphering other thoughts, by reading their brain data, and access all of the internet of database and capabilities inside their mind. So that sort of rhetoric is there, but should be concerned. So for the last few minutes, I'll be showing what we're doing here at the Ethics Lab. Yes, philosophers do work. So what are we doing, actually? I'm going to show you what we're doing. There's an element here. I'm sure you have perceived through my short and compressed talk some element of hype, scientific hype, but as well ethical hype. This is the conclusion of Tang Piper, you know, the machine that look at the oxygen. So they conclude that every human brains contain the history of their life, interior as well as exterior, spell out in real letters. But these letters belong to a specific language that nature used to address us all. Thus, a researcher with a perfect AI neurotechnology capable of seeing these letters and with an ability to comprehend their signification might be able to read a dead person's brain, the thought they might have had during their lifetime. It's a bit scary to think that with the right tool, we're capable of extracting and reading the mind. The only thing is that it's as a prank. That wasn't written by a modern scientist. That was written by Guillaume Lambert-Godard in 1755, okay? What I've changed simply the word anatomist by researcher and AI neurotechnologies by microscope, okay? That belief that we can access, you know, that sanctum internum, that sacrosanct element of your brain is probably just a mythology that keeps some scientists busy, having a salary and people like me chasing them and telling them, stop exaggerating a little bit. But doesn't mean that the data that is pumped out of your brain should not be regulated, that data. And we did a large interpretive content analysis. There's an exponential usage of those technologies. We looked at elements that are discussed: privacy, freedom of thought, personhood, mental integrity. And the difficulty is that when we try to regulate, to put law, legislation, regulation on those machine extracting neural data, it's difficult to pinpoint what they're doing, actually. So in some cases, about visual percept, signal, semantic content, dissect, memories, emotion, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very hard at the moment. And often simply those elements or concepts that are in fashion during a specific epoch and then become obsolete after 20 years, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very hard to legislate on those elements. If you need more detail, we worked that piece with the brilliant Ingrid Rousseau, so I invite you. It's open access if you want to see and read about it. But if you need to remember something, it's that, yes, there's likely a bubble in relation with fMRI declaration and narrative. Yes, those machines are becoming quite impressive, but it doesn't mean that they are actually doing what scientists are claiming to. They have to make a living, same as philosophers or ethicists, we have to make a living. So sometimes we tend to be exaggerated. But again, we still likely need legislation to see where our brain data and where it's going. And here, the fabulous Didier Bourdon has found out that in Mexico, they're trying to change also their criminal law in relation to neurotechnologies. But they found out that one of the articles that they are suggesting will actually make it criminal if you are basically implanting or suppressing memories in someone's brain. So it's a bit like science fiction, but if we think really carefully about it, are we really getting close to implanting someone's fake memories? There's through neurotechnologies. I'm just asking that question. And to conclude, there's many laws in many countries that are pointless, futile. And here's an example. There's a law in France, an arrêté, it's called an arrêté, Châteauneuf-du-Pape, excellent wine, very expensive, excellent wine. Since 1959, there's a law that forbids and bans UFOs to park or fly above Châteauneuf-du-Pape vignoble. I'm not sure if that was the right investment. So if Australia needs to investigate further into neural rights, neural data, we have to be careful where we're spending the resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fred, for a fascinating deep dive into something that feels like it should be in the realms of science fiction, but clearly isn't. Our final speaker tonight is Dr. Joel Scanlan. Joel is a senior lecturer at the University of Tasmania, specialising in cybersecurity and privacy. He has over 2 decades of experience in teaching and consulting across industry and academia. His research focuses on the technical and social harms of the internet, especially in the prevention of child exploitation, cybersecurity, and the use of machine learning. Joel works in close collaboration with experts in law, psychology, and data science. Please welcome Joel.
Thanks, Jack. And yeah, thanks, Mars and Fred, for those first 2 talks. Really super interesting. I'm very much from a cybersecurity background. It's actually not what I'm going to be talking about tonight. But when we get to the question time later, if you want a cybersecurity and AI question, feel free to throw it out there. What I am going to talk about, though, is in that societal harm of the internet side of things, and where AI is actually both providing some promise and some peril. And what that is in relation to online child exploitation, as Jack just mentioned. And so before I get into the AI of it, quick sort of definition around this sort of unfortunately growing problem that we're sort of facing as a society, and that's sort of the sharing and creation of child sexual abuse material, or CSAM as it'll be referred to in the rest of the presentation. This is basically, from a definitional point of view, is any sort of material, whether it's written, whether it's video, whether it's an image, all sorts of different things about a child in a sort of a sexual context or in a sexual activity. In Australia, very much illegal. I think probably fairly well aware of that it is something that both at a Commonwealth and a state level and the territories as well, is against the law. However, it has very much grown in prevalence, unfortunately, and indeed accelerated through that COVID time as well. So it's now more of it than it's ever actually been, which is really unfortunate. And this does include AI-generated CSAM. And in the Tassie context, to touch on that ever briefly for a moment, the first person across the country who was actually arrested and went to jail for AI-generated CSAM was a Tasmanian. I was in Sweden last year for a big international conference, and it's a bit weird to be sitting in that audience having people talk about Tassie because it was one of the first globally. So it's not necessarily something Tassie can be proud of, unfortunately. So a couple of the numbers. 1 in 4 children in Australia, unfortunately, experience sexual abuse. That's not all online, that's all sort of forms of that. But if we look at the online context, the ACE, which is operated by the AFP up in Brizzy, who deals with all the online stuff, in the financial year 2023 through 2024, there was 58,000 reports through to the ACE, which is a 45% increase year on year. Globally, NCMEC in the US, which is sort of where most reports go, it's where big companies like Meta and Google and stuff report all theirs, released a report about 2 months ago showing that last year they received over 20 million reports. That's actually dramatically down on the year before because the adoption of end-to-end encryption means that a company like Facebook actually reported 40% less than the year before. And it's not because they're changing what's happening there, it's just it's all encrypted and no one really knows about it. If we touch on the AI element of this though, what we're seeing is a dramatic increase in the amount of AI-generated CSAM. And so 1,300% noticed by NCMEC and the US. In the UK, the Internet Watch Foundation, which is sort of broadly equivalent there, 380% across a similar time period. If we look at Australia from an offender perspective, a recent survey of about 2,000 Australian males found that 1 in 6 reported ever having sexual feelings towards a child, and 2.5% of this group, of the full 2,000 rather, had knowingly gone searching for and looking for CSAM online. There's like another 4% who spoke inappropriately with a minor online and admitted that as well. So the offending levels are pretty scary high. But after probably just bumming you out completely with all of that, before I get to the perils, I'm actually going to the promise and say, well, how can AI actually help us in this context? This is the ACE here in Brizzy, which handles most of the online stuff in our context. A bunch of challenges. Across the country, there's only 20-ish, it's actually under 20, it's 19, victim identification specialists who see the image or video and then investigate where is this child to try and then obviously go and rescue from that situation. Looking at that content is probably one of the most miserable jobs you can possibly imagine, and so the burnout rates are really high. And so in that context, AI actually provides us with this opportunity to be better at that job, detecting CSAM, making it so that an investigator can look at a smaller subset of the imagery because it can then analyze the larger set of images and go, well, this is all the good bits of evidence from this that we can then use and do that. So AI does present us with a bunch of opportunities here. So in investigation support, it's an active area of research. Some colleagues in University of Adelaide have done on this cool diagram here on the side, looking at images, looking at videos and going, is the same child in these different images? Is the same offender in these same images? How much sort of evidence can we actually gather? Biometrics in terms of face recognition, voice detection, all that sort of stuff, which is really great. The Alex lab at Monash in Victoria, they're doing lots of image localization stuff. So, oh, there's a couch in the picture. Where's that couch from? What brand is it? Oh, there's some curtains. Where might that be? And try to figure out, you know, from the other things in scenes, where are they so we can try and locate the child. Mapping of peer relationships in the dark web, that's happening in multiple different research contexts. I actually worked on a project doing that yesterday afternoon as I was also preparing my slides at the same time. Here at UTAS, we're partnering with a firm in New Zealand that make police investigation software called Pathfinder Labs, and we're working with them on automated psychological monitoring of those police investigators to sort of provide them assistance and help. But probably the biggest area of research all around the world is CSAM detection, using AI to figure out, is this image that's been uploaded to a system or being shared, is this actually CSAM? So that's happening in lots of places, which is great, meaning that the computer can tell us this is bad without needing a human in the loop as much. There's still humans in the loop. Researchers at Monash have got this project here on the side. It's very colourful, again, at the Alex lab that I mentioned. Building data sets of children in normal scenarios to then train the model so we can then pick, this is CSAM, this is not. And so you can actually upload and share to them images that are normal to help train their models. And it's about trying to get those data sets in a nice way, as opposed to what we see some AI companies doing, as Mars mentioned, constantly scraping the web without permission. This is about building data sets in an ethical way. Grooming detection, very active area of research as well around the world, which is great. Here at UTAS, we're doing loads of work in automated deterrence, and I'm going to come back around to our UTAS work at the end. But off those different detection mechanisms and points, it's an opportunity to provide warning messages and tell people this is not okay, and refer them on to therapeutic services, all those sorts of pieces, which are really useful. And in this context, we've done some work with e-safety on a chatbot for an adolescent population, more for information in this context and giving them assistance and help, so more sort of victim-focused in that context. But we also have been involved with a very large project with partnership with Pornhub and the Internet Watch Foundation and a charity in the UK to deploy a chatbot on Pornhub in the UK. When someone would search for a term that related to CSAM, they would then get this warning that you can see there, and a chatbot that would then talk to them and interact with them and try to encourage them towards support services and that sort of stuff. Now, it's actually quite successful. It's still running in the UK. It's not running in Australia. But across an 18-month period there, to talk a little bit about prevalence in the UK there, the chatbot was actually fired off 2.8 million times. And so that's people searching for CSAM on a site that probably safely say doesn't actually have CSAM on it. Pornhub do an awful lot of work in their tech stack to try and keep it off because it's illegal for them to have it. And said in that context, we see a lot of people searching for it, which is clearly problematic. But the kinds of deterrence work we're doing at UTAS, resulting in 82% of sessions that had the chatbot appear, didn't actually then continue to search for content of that nature, which is obviously a great outcome. Overall, it reduced the volume of searches occurring for that kind of content, which is also exactly what we want. And in those conversations with the chatbot, about 1,600, which feels really small in the context of 2.8 million, but 1,600 people requested help from that chatbot. Yeah. So, whoops. So that's the promise. AI can hopefully help us to investigate better. It can help us to detect and deter those sorts of behaviours. But on the perils side, I mentioned at the top that Tasmanian man who was, arrested. Clearly there's other elements to this. So how does AI impact on CSAM in terms of growing what's happening there? And so in this context, we are seeing CSAM generated with AI based on images from social media. And so this is where someone's picture on Instagram gets taken and they feed it into an AI model saying, make this picture of this child now into a CSAM image, which is obviously deeply problematic. And it's why you're increasingly seeing a lot of people not putting their children on publicly facing social media, or they're blurring their faces and doing all those sorts of elements, because people are becoming aware that this is actually happening, which is obviously deeply unfortunate. Deeply unfortunate doesn't really sum it up, but you can understand it's in the flow of talking. We're seeing new AI-generated content based on abuse material that's years and decades old. And so you've got victims that have already gone through this trauma. They've possibly even gone through the court processes and had their abusers put into prison, all that sort of thing, but the imagery is still being shared. The imagery is then now being used by AI to create new images of them based on other content of theirs that's 20 years old. And then so they see pictures of them that is not really them, then re-traumatizing them all over again. And that's epically bad. Fully synthetic CSAM, we hear a bunch of about that. People say there's no victim there. It's not true, because it's just growing the market. And that's not good, because then other children are harmed. But the other side of it is fully synthetic CSAM wastes police resources. They spend their time trying to figure out, is this real? Is it not? Often thinking this is real when it isn't. They're trying to locate where this child is to rescue them from that situation, meaning that of those 70,000 cases where there's only 20 investigators, we're already not investigating all of them. And so then you get CSAM that's AI generated, taking up police time, meaning other children aren't being investigated. And so it's this whirlpool down and down of getting worse. We see large language models, the ChatGPT and whatnot that was obviously mentioned earlier by Mars, generating scripts to talk to children. Those grooming scripts to then get sexual extortion and a whole bunch of other range of issues. I wanted to talk about a bit of a case study example. Last year in Korea, many of us probably aren't aware that they had an absolute crisis. They had imagery of basically teenagers, for the most part, in schools, all being targeted with deepfakes. So there was 500 schools across South Korea last year that had channels on encrypted chats where people were then generating and sharing AI deepfakes of the students in those schools. Often the imagery taken from the school websites, their yearbooks, all that sort of stuff, and then fed into these chatbots that would then actually produce the image for them. One of those chatbots had over 220,000 subscribers, all of which got 2 generated deepfake images for free, and every subsequent image cost about 50 cents Australian. So it's really cheap, it's all automated, and then what we see is across South Korea last year, large protests by students, by teachers, massive crackdown obviously occurred, loads and loads of arrests, although not all of them. But if we look at then those arrested people, 80% of them were teenagers. The average age was under 14 years of age. And so they were their peers generating these imagery of their classmates at an absolutely industrial scale. This bit of Korean in the middle here on this slide I'm expecting most of you probably can't read Korean. This is a photo from a yearbook that on every single page of the yearbook, it then says making deepfake imagery is illegal. I mean, can you imagine being a school kid having that in your yearbook? But it's not just in South Korea. It's here as well. On the right-hand side here, a bunch of news headlines of different examples across news in Australia, multiple different states being involved. The bottom one was on, I think, Monday this week. So some of you possibly saw that in the news. But it's true in Tassie schools as well. I've had conversations with TasPol. They've had to go to multiple schools around our state where deepfake images are being created by classmates of each other. These are also it's not just that classmate perspective. Sexual extortion gangs use AI to generate pictures of people to then blackmail them for money, other imagery, and we see that increasing as well. But again, after bumming you out probably for the second time, let's come back around to the plan. What can we do? Yes, there's AI that can then work towards some of these solutions. We need a societal-wide response. You guys being here tonight, hearing this speech about how bad this situation is an education point. You guys then being able to then be aware of that, telling other people. We all need to actually, as a village, protect ourselves and protect those vulnerable amongst us, which includes obviously our young people. So the education piece is important. We need to shrink the offender pool because we actually can't arrest our way out of it. I don't know how many of you did the maths quickly before, but 2.5% of all Australian males is just under 300,000 males. I don't think we have 300,000 people in prison in the country. So they would have to literally arrest more than we currently have in our prison population. So you can see that it doesn't work from a maths perspective. We've got to shrink this offender pool. We've got to get people realising this is not something to do. And so that's a really key piece there around the education element. The current review of the Online Safety Act, which it says here October 2024, that was when it was written. It was released publicly, I think, on the 1st of February this year. So it's only a little bit more recent there. All through that report, which I'm probably the only person in the room who's read it, which is fair, it says the word duty of care. I think it's like 150 odd times around pushing that online platforms of all shapes and sizes, we need to have to adopt a duty of care so we can go after them if they're producing systems that aren't safe, if they're producing systems that aren't actually designed to keep our community safe. AI is part of the plan. Detecting harmful behaviours at scale, intervening, stopping things from occurring is a key part of it. I'll put this up here as a QR code you can scan. This is about an open letter to government. We've got a new government. You know, we all sort of love elections to some degree, I suppose, or hate them. But this open letter, we actually wrote before the election, before it was written, we were sort of writing it, and then the election got called and we decided to hold off and wait. This is an open call to the government around this exact thing, written by a bunch of AI experts from across the country and indeed NGOs and whatnot who work in this space, calling for the government to be more active in this space, to put laws in place to protect our community. And so feel free to read that. It's led by ICMEC, but UTAS is a signatory. It's one of the 3 universities that are a signatory to this open letter. A final thing I'll just touch on, UTAS is pretty active in this space. In about a month's time or so, haven't got a date yet, we're in the process of launching a research centre here called the CSAM Deterrence Centre, where we're working with lots of tech companies to actually implement safety by design principles to combat CSAM, and that's a key bit of work that we're doing here. But after that, I'll hand back over to Jack.
Thank you, Joel. And how good to finish on such a balanced perspective of both peril and promise. And I guess to see that AI is a tool, it's a tool that can be used for harm and good. So thank you to all of our speakers for guiding us through such distinct but thought-provoking perspectives. For me, I've been really reflecting on the value of the human connection in this space and our role and how we have to be active in that role and not passive. So I would like to invite Joel, Frederick and Mars to join me on stage, not here on stage, over there on stage, as we turn to the more interactive part of the evening. So we're now going to invite your questions. All right, so while we're moving microphones around, I'm going to quickly take one from online because you guys get the benefit of being in the room. They've had to sit through this entire thing in whichever space they're in. Fred, I'm going to start with one for you. This is from Kim. Were the AI systems that used oxygen consumption to predict what a person was thinking trained on that person's oxygen consumption to no stimulus, or would it work on a previous untested subject? Very specific.
For that specific experiment of them, the training was personalized, had signature of the individual. So it couldn't be translated to another individual unless they would spend 16 hours within the machine. But I would invite Kim to read their latest paper published 2 months ago. Their new converter is capable of skipping that 16 hours and using strictly the training of one individual to be universal. And not only that, they don't even need words. The person don't need to speak, be aware of a syntax of grammar, just thinking about a flow of thought, it's enough for the computer to extract a meaning and semantic. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Questions from the floor.
Thank you. That's pretty incredible, that research and those outcomes. I'm wondering if that sort of research is also being applied to other species to try and decipher intelligence amongst animals, etc.
Yes, absolutely. It's a big market, actually. There are startups. You can Google and buy some of those mind reader for your dogs or cats. Yeah, there's investment. No, I'm not kidding. Yeah. There's people investing into that. Yeah, it's a big market. Yeah. Then again, it's a question of equity, whether or not it's fair to invest so much money into that domain, knowing that many veteran or patients suffering from ALS, paralysis would need that support instead. Yeah, but yes, to your answer is yes.
All right, one from online first. A couple of anonymous ones. I'm going to give this one to you, Mars. More generally around creative content. How do we do this better? How do we train better models that aren't using stolen content? Or when AI does generate something, who then owns the copyright in that space?
So I think there's two distinct parts to that question. The first one about how we can do this better kind of, again, has two halves, where one is a technical solution and one is social solutions. Technical solutions are that there are a range of ways that you can, we'll say, poison images that you put out there. So if you are an artist and you create digital artworks and you put them out there on the internet and you fear that they're going to get scraped because no amount of licensing or copywriting is protecting you at the moment, there are methods that you can run filters over these images, which mean when they get ingested by these models, they won't be able to interpret them as well. And there's also some more in-depth solutions, like if you have, so usually these bots work by going around the internet and they'll like start at Google and they'll follow all the links and they will download all of the content on every page they visit. And we're getting these fun, Joel might have some fun things to say about this, these poisoned honeypots, where you can make a website which will cause an automated crawler that has gone there to read it to just go around in circles forever. And you can make sure that every page it visits is full of junk. So it is just getting worse and worse. So there's some very punk things happening on the internet about people trying to protect themselves. But at the same time, we can protect things by making sure that there are alternative kind of motivations for people to do the right thing. You can refuse to buy content generated on data that you don't know where it comes from. There's a lot to be said for kind of social disparagement. Like many years ago when we made Wikipedia and everyone was worried about the provenance of that information, we just made it kind of socially unacceptable for you to use that as your only source. And now it's become an incredibly rigorous platform by which we can go looking for other sources. It's become this kind of exploratory thing. It's the best that it could be because we refuse to have it the way that it was and the way that things were going. And we can do that here. We can refuse to consume AI from these faceless models from large companies that are being employed without proper sources. You can poison your stuff. You can get, there are technical solutions to protect you. And yeah, as a consumer, I guess you have a lot to say. If everyone says the market's in charge, you're the market.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. One from the floor.
It's for Fred. You had talked about, hey, we need a new code of rights for these implants. Okay, pretty well any right you care to name is in conflict with other rights. And so one develops complex normative ethical models for how these things all interact. Is it a simple hierarchy or whatever? So you might have something that overrides that right, is my question. Say, let's assume you're the Chinese Communist Party. Say you could pop an implant in every citizen's head that told you when they were having nasty thoughts, and perhaps even automatically produced a remedial intervention that fried those thoughts and directed them to thoughts of birds singing in the trees or something.
Yeah. Okay. So the current scenario that is describing, if we're talking about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, those are soft law that still need to be enforced by an entity or an agency. And at the moment, even if a country would implant all their citizens in order for them to do X, Y, or Z, it'd be hard to have the police chasing that country in particular. So the weakness of the current protocol trying to enhance those rights, if they do exist, again, I'm skeptical, I wasn't supporting them necessarily, would be to make sure that those soft law became something more rigorous. And the example that we have got at the moment for Chile, Brazil thinking about it, Spain, Mexico, those examples look at whether the constitution can be changed. In Australia, if you were to put new legislation, I don't think the constitution would be the right door to open. Rather, you could let penal law, civil law first. But I'm not sure I've answered your question. No, thank you.
One from online. This is an anonymous question, but I'm going to give it to you, Joel. The question is, what are the panelists' thoughts on what broad public support and pressure on AI development could look like, especially in regards to wider societal dangers of AI?
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I think a key piece of this is really us all becoming aware that they're not these magic boxes that give us the right answer. A lot of that sort of first use of something like ChatGPT, people go, oh, wow, this is amazing, and it's amazing. But if you actually interact with it in an area where you are actually an expert or you know a decent amount about the area, it's usually fairly easy to pick holes in it and see where it's poor and see where it's actually suboptimal work, as Miles was talking about. And so I think to some degree, the honeymoon on AI probably is wearing off. People are increasingly aware of this, and it's about us being skeptical. As Miles was saying before, we are the market. We need to request that they are better, whatever that is. There's multiple measures there, whether it's how's that data sourced, what is the actual usage of things that are going into it. Now, we're talking about medical devices, we're talking about other devices. That transparency on what data train that thing is a really key piece. And I think from a societal push, we need to be doing a lot more on requesting transparency around what data trained this model. Up to this point, there's not been much of a push on that. I think the more we push on that, we will then get better outputs from the companies as they're having to disclose that. Whether it requires legislation in different jurisdictions to then force there to be disclosures of particular things, I think in medical context, that's probably likely to happen. General knowledge stuff from a ChatGPT is probably much harder to try and have that sort of level of transparency. So I think that societal pushback to me has to be around transparency of what it was trained on. That's probably what that looks like to me.
I think there's a few things. I think that as a worker, you want to have a candid conversation and often go to your union if you're being pressured to use tools that will degrade the quality of your work. I think that we've got to kind of think about what we strictly need. So like, I think about it as like, yes, this strictly makes average work. For lots of things, average is okay. Or for strictly a certain proportion of the world, average work is probably better than what they can do on certain topics. So there's going to be cases where it allows us to re-examine kind of craft work, where like if you have an email that you're using a ChatGPT to write and they're using a ChatGPT to read it, then maybe you didn't need to send it. If you're using it for all these forms because this is low value tasks in your work, why do those tasks need to exist? At the same time, there's kind of places for the stuff you put real effort in. Like there still needs to be a place for your expert craft and for you to have some sort of inherent value in the things that people took the time to make. That's not to say that there's not room for the IKEA kind of tasks in your daily life, but there's still like occasionally you need to make that custom table. That's the thing that is your actual craft. That's the thing that people are paying you for. You know, it's about knowing your value and being able to look at all the things that you offer and which ones are important, which ones are critical, which are the ones that affect other people. Again, the market stuff. And at an institutional level, I think especially for the university, we need to think about how those perceptions can affect us. So a university kind of exists only on this shared assumption that we all decide that expert information is valuable, that we care where our information comes from, that we care about that it came from somebody who has read all these information and perspectives and kind of come to this arrival. And if we kind of go on this ride where we think it's okay for everyone to not care about where any of their information comes from and it's all in this big soup, then I don't think a university has much of a future there, and that we should be more than ever solidifying our place as we're the place that you come to when you need to know that this particular information came from a person, is important, will be used for something critical.
So putting more value on events like this, which is fantastic. Did you have one ready to go up there? Great.
Okay, my question's from Joel. I'm assuming I'm not the only person in this room who's never heard the term deep fake before. While I think I got the context of it and I could go away and Google it, I'm not sure I want to go away and Google it. So would you just please clarify a little?
Yeah, I mean, deep fakes as a broad term and the broad definition of it being basically an image or a video or whatever, a person who's not real. Plenty of those exist in contexts that aren't related to child abuse. So Googling it, the first thing you're probably going to see is, you know, Donald Trump dressed up as the Pope a couple of weeks ago that was on news everywhere. That is a deep fake image. That is, you know, Donald Trump is happily not the Pope. So a deep fake is, a fake image, fake video, of someone that looks just like them, for the rapid definition.
We've got a young person in the front of the room with their hand up. Let's not waste this opportunity.
Hi, thanks for the chat, guys. In terms of generative AI, how do we create more pure data for it to consume, to output better content?
I think that people have to be motivated to create it. So right now we've got a case where if you put anything on the internet, that's now kind of fodder for going into these models. And like I said, then these models make most of the internet, which are going back into it again. So if you don't have that proper provenance of where your content comes from, such as indiscriminately scraping the web, then that's not going to do you any favors. But also if you want expert stuff, you kind of need to pay for it. So like a big thing about OpenAI is that they scraped LibGen, which is like a huge piracy database of books that have been authored by some of us here. And we know like 45 of my husband's books were in that repository they scraped and didn't pay for. And so people aren't going to be motivated to create new things because not only have you taken their stuff prior without permission, why would they give you the next thing for free? But also now you're creating something that they're competing with. So you need the same people who would provide you with that quality content to go into your models to also kind of see some inherent value in using your models, because otherwise you just create this entire market where there are some people whose stuff you steal and some other people that you give stuff to for free, which does neither side any favors. Because ideally, like the ultimate form of this tool is that you're becoming more skilled and more informed through its use, that you would end up being both a creator and a consumer, and that everyone would be involved in this shared ecosystem. You know, when they're talking about the democratization of media and information, that's not happening right now because the loop isn't closed. And I think that's what needs to happen.
And I'll just add to that, the quality of the information that's gone into these models, just like Paris's books by the sound of things, is actually a high quality. It's just that it's been stolen. So part of your question, there's a little bit of premise there. Some of the quality is actually amazing. Part of what's produced these suboptimal, very average outputs is also just a constraint of how these models work. Large language models are really good at predicting what's the next sort of English word that should go here, or next word that should go here, because it's multiple languages. They're not actually thinking. They're just predicting what's the next sort of sets of words that feel like they go here really well. They're a BS generator. We've all had that friend who's really good at talking, but we know it's all BS, right? That is generally how these work. And so there's a bit of a limitation on the sort of architecture of large language models generally, that is there. So there's sort of two pieces here. In terms of getting better quality, it is actually an architectural change that will occur over time as new models come about and all the rest of it. And the sort of advanced reasoning versions of Gemini and stuff are actually much better, but that's still a limit. The quality of the content is actually there, but there's that ethical thing of, hey, it's all stolen. So we've actually got two sets of issues there that lead to the state of the models at the moment.
Just have a quick anecdote. It's about the isomorphism, the sameness of the output of the system not being able to be creative. When you mark student nowadays, there's basically no grammar error or syntactic error, but they all sound the same actually. So if you mark 300 copy, we would see actually a human among the mass who have written because of those ways of system is saturated by the fact that they are pretty plain rather than creative. Yeah.
I have a question for Mars. You said how using AI on the whole, like ChatGPT, ends up only giving you maybe a 2 to 3% increase in productivity because it creates extra tasks for you, like editing. Could you please elaborate on how it actually ends up being so unproductive or just about the same?
This is from a particular series of studies coming from the Institute of Economics at the University of Chicago, which did a study across like 11 different kinds of companies across all different professions, like 25,000 different people at all different levels of the company. So this was looking at kind of the disparity between how much productivity people thought they gained versus how much time they actually gained back. Looking at, okay, well, if it takes you, well, because you kind of have these different structures of work. If you were going to write something yourself, you have to do that research and then you have to write it. If you're getting ChatGPT to write something for you, you still have to kind of do all of the research around what you would need to write it to get that right prompt. You have to whittle it down. You have to edit it. Now, of course, not everyone who does these kinds of tasks are necessarily editing as much as they should, but at an organizational perspective, and certainly at an industry perspective, it's averaging out to, yes, being very non-homogeneous. There are lots of people who get much faster and lots of people who don't use it at all, who have to then bear the brunt of their workmates using it a lot. Most people are in the middle. They're just not using it in an optimal way. They're not necessarily understanding its strengths. They're now, while they're gaining productivity, it actually means that they're context switching between tasks a lot more than they would, because you kind of have this flow loss where usually if you were to write a particular document, you would just stick on that until you're kind of done. Now people know that they can pick up and put down tasks very easily. They're actually switching more and they're getting more lost time throughout their day. Then, of course, because people had less context about their own work, it meant that they were adding more time to having to share that context with their workmates. So when they work in teams, then you had all of these additional tasks to, okay, now I have to reread this thing that I didn't quite write so that I can communicate it to others. So they were mostly, if you worked by yourself and you were an expert user, I do not necessarily think that that would be representative of how productive you would be, but you are not an island. When you get to a company level, they were seeing no measurable effects to productivity, no matter how productive an individual thought that they were being within multiple departments.
We've got an interesting question from Susan online, and I'm not going to nominate one of you. I'm going to let you vie for who wants to take this one. We've been talking about AI, but how far does the panel think we are from AGI?
Same amount we've always been. Artificial general intelligence. So
Yeah, that would be.
There's kind of this accepted idea that an AI will reach a point where all of a sudden it is as sentient as any human could be. So that means there's kind of two sides to the argument. At what point is it that? And also, how sentient are we to measure the kind of benchmark we're going for?
I share this measurement of yours. I think we're still at the same point where we were 300 years ago. I think it's part of what I would classify as academic mythology. It's again very interesting to debate, very fascinating. I'm not here to censor any scholar if they want to write about it or the investment going toward that. But I think the very notion of bring us to a sort of paradox that cannot even be applied in reality if it's happening. So I'm not sure if Joel, you have a vision about it. Or...
Yeah, I mean, to me, there's an awful lot said about this, and it's usually said by people who have a financial interest in it being 5 years away or 10 years away. And so when you hear the CEO of OpenAI who makes ChatGPT saying, oh, we're 2 years away from it, his stock price goes up. He's suddenly worth more money. So
money, please.
Money, please. Exactly. So you've got to sort of think about those elements to this, because at the end of the day, as I was saying, answer to a question a little while ago, those current models are really good at predicting what word to say next. They're not really thinking about it. And that's that key difference, that sentience, that independence, that sort of what all the movies have in them. Which is kind of amusing now. I was on a flight on Sunday and I noticed the genres in Qantas had killer AI as a genre now. And I'm like, oh, I didn't realize we'd got to that point. But sorry, that's a complete tangent. But it's that complete independent thought, its own motivations, going to kill all humanity, Terminator situation. That's not really how these large language models work. They're too busy predicting what the next word is. There's no real thought there. And so that's why that comment of, oh, we're still decades away from it, or whereas, the same point we were 300 years ago. I'm not sure I'm on that thing. I think we're closer than we were 300 years ago, but I also don't think it's happening on any sort of timescale we're hearing from big tech leaders.
Well, I think it's more of a question of like, what's the question you're really asking? At what point do I need to take it seriously as an expert? At what point do I need to worry about its feelings? At what point do I need to query my own consciousness more deeply? And the answer to all of those sub-questions are different as to what point we would count an artificial intelligence as sophisticated enough. It is not yet expert. I don't think it will ever be at a point where we will prioritize its rights over that of a human, and little else of the debate, I think, really affects us at this point.
All right, we've got time for one more question, so let's make it count.
Now, a French philosopher, and you are a French philosopher, distinguished this after the Second World War. And from a Marxist point of view, he said, data is commodified. Be careful of who commodifies and controls it, as distinguished from knowledge. Your opinion?
My doxa. Well, the distinction doxa epistemon is quite crucial. And I think with some of those systems, we're falling into some epistemic dependency, or absence of epistemic independency, certainly with those data, because as the market is being designed, it's the company that owns those data that actually will gain the most out of it rather than yourself. And if I convert that into my tiny expertise with brain data, what is concerning is that I suppose most of you now have some idea. I want to go home, stop talking, I want to eat, okay? You don't need to confess that. But if you have a system capable of extracting that, that means you might even be guilty of thinking something prior. And yes, so who owns that data, who has the bias of that data will likely dictate a lot of how our society is being fashioned and where it's going actually. A positive note.
So acknowledging that people do want to go home, I think we've possibly come to the end of our discussion this evening. So please join me once again in thanking our presenters, Mars, Joel, and Frederick. And as we close, we return to the question that underpins this evening, not just what can AI do and what could it cost us, but who gets to decide? In the rush to automate, accelerate, and innovate, it's easy to forget that every algorithm is shaped by human hands and should be. Thank you all for taking part in tonight's conversation. And on behalf of the University of Tasmania, have a happy and safe evening.